So some joker out there decided to put a copyright strike on the previous time that I uploaded this particular video. It's probably not actually the Watchtower. I've done a little bit of looking around and it turns out that email is very suspicious. However, the only way to refute it through YouTube now is to submit to that person your personal information, which I'm not going to do, and it is probably why they put the strike on my video. So at this point, I don't really have any option to try and deal with this individual. So the easiest thing for me to do is to just remove all of the screenshots that I have taken from the Watchtower video, which were used well within fair use. However, to get around this joker, I'm just going to take them right out, and if you remember watching it before, you'll kind of know what it was. Otherwise, you can just watch the video on their website for yourself if you want to see what's going on there. So here it is again. Enjoy! Here are my thoughts from an outsider's perspective on the Watchtower 2022 convention, Sunday afternoon video number 2. Woohoo! Last one! Wait, this really is the last one, right? I sure hope so. This one starts off with a plea for financial donations to help pay for all the new productions that they have planned. That's right, JWs. If you want more amazing conventions like this one, time to get out your wallet. Then we're on to Jeffrey Jackson to give us his talk about how peace is not just an end of war. And that's true, war is complicated. And often it's full of sinful political goals. There is also a thing called just war, which I'm quite sure he won't touch on. A just war is one that is fought to protect and defend victims who cannot do that for themselves. An obvious example of this would be the war against Hitler and Nazi Germany. The Watchtower is so very proud of having nothing to do with that, I guess preferring instead that Hitler could take over the world and kill all the Jews, all the black people, all the disabled people, and the list goes on. He then goes on to tell us that peace means well-being, good health, and safety. He uses that to point towards Paradise Earth. The peace he keeps mentioning really doesn't even begin to touch on the true eternal peace that genuine born-again Christians have with God forever. It's a peace accomplished by God in His mercy for us. But we don't hear Brother Jeffrey mentioning that because the JW is told to have hope in Paradise Earth, not in the person of Jesus. I think this might be the first time in the convention that I have seen any of the speakers reading from his phone instead of the silver sword. How advanced! Next, he gives us 4 questions that he wants to pursue to walk you down the path towards putting your hope and faith in a future Paradise Earth. I would guess that JWs listen to this talk with eagerness, as it helps them to use this as part of their sales pitch during field service. But before he gets into this path, he does a review of the whole rest of the conference in order to set the stage. And then we also get a video showcasing scenes from the videos played throughout the conference. Now, this is what I would call filler to extend the video to the required length. Brother Jeffrey is sure to tell us what priceless lessons they all were, though. To get into his first point about why peace was lost, he tells us about Satan's rebellion and how that affected Adam and Eve. I'm really getting the idea that he's going to basically blame Satan, and probably Eve as well, just like Adam did and then Eve did, instead of taking responsibility for their own sin. And yes, that's basically what he does. Then he goes on to compare it to a human court case taking time, and saying that's why God let Satan have his time to rule the world first before stepping in. This view is, well, it sounds like deism to me. And also he's developing their teaching that Jesus is just a corresponding ransom for Adam, nothing more. The Bible never says anything like this, but I can see how he has to weave this tale in order to get their focus on Armageddon and Paradise Earth. Basically, for him, Satan messed things up by coercing Adam and Eve into sinning, and now we're stuck with Satan ruling us until Jehovah steps in any minute now, to finally take back his rule. As I've said before, their God is very tiny and powerless, isn't he? To press the point further, we get another video, which starts off with scenes and discussion about painful and difficult experiences that people have. It then goes on to talk about how Jehovah supports his people through the organization and its help for its followers in a variety of ways. Now he's on to his second point about who will restore peace. He actually starts off by mentioning Jesus, which is actually correct. I would suggest that the way he says that's going to happen is problematic, though. First, Jesus already accomplished salvation for his children. That peace is already attained. But for Brother Jeffrey, that's not his focus. He's just thinking about how things will all come together any minute now after Armageddon. And even then, that peace he's talking about will still have to unfold slowly over the course of 1,000 years. He then goes right into their usual newspaper eschatology to say why he believes Jesus will soon step in to help us, aka Armageddon. From there, he jumps to Matthew 24, which I know they do often. He ignores the context of the verse to try and use it as their standard proof text for their teachings. They really like ignoring that Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple and that the disciples were asking him two questions. One about the temple's destruction and the other about his return at the end. And I can see why they have to do this, and also how JWs most likely don't think to look into the passage itself to see what it's saying. Newspaper eschatology is pretty exciting and fun, which is why it's not just JWs who have engaged in it over the centuries. He also uses quite a few analogies to try and further convince his audience of what he's saying. I've noticed they do this often. So does my JW friend. If you've listened to much of those conversations that I've had with her, you've heard her do this a number of times. All analogies eventually do fall short, but the ones the Watchtower and my friend are using are terribly flawed right from the beginning. They're false analogies. But you have to think for yourself and examine them closely to recognize that, instead of just grabbing hold of them and saying, oh, that makes sense, I guess. That takes work. And it's work that JWs are not encouraged to engage in, because that could create trouble within the congregation, disturbing their perceived peace, which they don't want. Better to declare peace and have everyone just accept everything they say, right? He uses the analogy here of a strong password for your computer having 24 characters, and how the sign of the end of the system of things has at least 24 different features. What? Where does it say anything like that in the text? Then he jumps to a jigsaw analogy about piecing together all the events that are supposed to take place before Armageddon, and yet again saying that means we know for sure that it means we've got it right this time and it will happen imminently. Just like they've been saying all the time for nearly 150 years now. It amazes me how long-time JWs keep on buying this, even though they have lived through so many decades of them being wrong about it. But I guess at some point you must just go numb and stop thinking about it at all, just listening to and believing everything they say. Then we get yet another analogy, this time of standing at an airport and seeing the location of planes posted on the screens, as if this is the same as seeing the evidence of the signs that prove Armageddon is close. Yeah, this is definitely part of the repetition used to brainwash people. Next he tells us how Jesus, the angels, and the 144,000 are going to remove the old world and restore peace. And I can see why he has to word it that way. Their Jesus is really powerless, so he needs that Christ class of the 144,000 plus all the angels to get the job done. This part reminds me of that talk from Anthony Morris, who discusses all the charred human remains like a hot dog on a grill that will be left after Armageddon is done, for the remaining great crowd to clean up. Next, he goes to Revelation 12 and casually mentions how Jesus started reigning in 1914, though that's nowhere mentioned in the Bible. Then he jumps over to Revelation 19 to talk about how Jesus is going to destroy all the political organizations on the earth. I think this is a pretty standard way that they try to handle the book of Revelation. I found it interesting how he emphasized that all who rebel against Jesus will be destroyed. How does that even work with their teaching? Does he really mean all those who rebel against the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society will be destroyed? Because Jesus is really such a very minor figure in their doctrine. They also criticize Christians, which they call Christendom, acting as if that's some kind of bad version of Christianity, though the words both mean the same thing, for focusing too much on Jesus, for worshiping him, for dying for his name and proclaiming his name to the world, just like they did in the Bible. Somehow, they're trying to see that as rebelling against Jesus, making us, Babylon the Great, deserving of destruction at Armageddon. Then he hops over to Revelation 20, again totally skipping the context of any of these passages, just trying to stick them together like cramming random jigsaw pieces together. Here he gets into a claim that those who disrupt peace will gradually and progressively be removed. I'd like to ask a JW what that means exactly. Is he saying that there will be peace wreckers during the 1,000 years who will slowly be killed off? Does that sound like the paradise earth that they're always selling their followers on? Or is he saying that this all happens gradually before Armageddon? Or is he saying that Armageddon itself will be a really long, slow process? If you have any idea about this, please comment below. I honestly don't see how this comment fits with what I've heard from JWs and read in their publications. Is it more new light? Of course, I've never been a JW and haven't read anywhere near all the literature, so I am really curious. It also sounds to me like he's saying that Paradise Earth is actually Earth really slowly being turned into a paradise over 1,000 years. But then near the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is released and lots more people rebel with him. How is that a part of paradise? What do JWs think about this kind of thing? Do they just hold on to a kind of pride that they aren't really sinners and would never side with Satan near the end like that? What about other people, like their loved ones? Is this one of those things that they tend to just put on the shelf so they don't have to think more deeply about it? I would think that even if you are at least somewhat convinced that you only sin because Satan makes you do it, this whole thing must still sound very upsetting and disturbing. After some more proof texting in Romans, he jumps to a psalm about a prayer for Solomon and tells us that it is prophetic of the 1,000-year reign. Now, certainly, as we see throughout the Old Testament, this psalm is one of the many types and shadows pointing forward to the coming of Christ. But the way he tries to equate this specifically to the millennium really doesn't fit very well, does it? The way he tries to use it suggests that there will be a tremendous amount of suffering on Paradise Earth that people will still need to be rescued from. Again, is this really paradise? I can imagine JWs would say this means the suffering refers to the time just before Armageddon, and then the peace and rescue happens because of Armageddon. That's not what he's been saying here. When he uses words like gradually, and as far as I can tell, is talking about the 1,000 years, not the time before the 1,000 years. For those of you here who are ex-JWs, what did you believe about all of this? Was it a confusing mess of contradictory statements? Or do most JWs have a particular view and just kind of ignore occasional statements made that don't quite fit with it? At this point, he is focused primarily on the end of the 1,000 years, which he says is the end of the kingdom arrangement and that sort of thing, and also finally the end of death. So they do believe that Paradise Earth does still include sin and death that won't end until the 1,000 years are over. That would certainly fit with the idea that there is still suffering and a need to be rescued throughout that time, doesn't it? Then he talks about how at the end of the 1,000 years, the verdict is in. and seems to be pointing that towards the war between Jehovah and Satan. That makes it sound like there's this almost seemingly equal forces kind of war between God and Satan that is to be decided by some higher court. This is definitely not at all found in Scripture anywhere. God is the only all-powerful one. Satan is creation. He never had any power at all over God. Never. In fact, the book of Job shows us that anything Satan wants to do can only happen if God allows for it. That is some pretty big stuff to think about, I know. But it really points so much to who God is versus who Satan is, and also who we are as God's creation. He also makes it sound like Jesus handing the kingdom to the Father at the end of the 1,000 years is what really means paradise can begin, because apparently Jesus didn't do as good a job at ruling the kingdom as the Father can. In fact, he really makes it sound like Jesus will do a pretty poor job overall, so they should look forward to him being kind of out of the way at the end. Yikes. He actually says that once Jehovah is ruling, people won't need a mediator anymore. What does that mean? I need to ask a JW about that sometime. Does he mean that people like himself who consider themselves to be part of the literal 144,000 will no longer need Jesus to mediate for them? What about the rest of the JWs? Does this mean at that point that the literal 144,000 finally won't have to co-mediate for the great crowd, for whom Jesus is not the mediator? And finally, they finish up with a video about all the things he was just saying, showing us scenes again from earlier videos intermingled with shots of those actors walking out in nature, and I'm assuming that's supposed to be on Paradise Earth. And they have that repetitive song playing over this one again, which the congregation also gets to sing after the video is done. After all the happy footage of the people on Paradise Earth enjoying nature, fruit, and teaching people from millennia ago all about the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society system of things, we get a shot of their Jehovah on an uncomfortable-looking throne surrounded by the literal 144,000 all lined up, also on uncomfortable-looking mini-thrones, ruling with him. No wonder JWs don't want to be born again, if this is what they think it means. Then Brother Jackson summarizes how they have so much to look forward to because of their friendship with God. Then they play the same song again with the lyrics both sung and read for the congregations to sing along with. I wonder how many sung that with gusto, because they were mostly just so glad it's the last video of the convention. Okay, that is it. We're through all of them now. Thanks for checking out my commentary on the 2022 Watchtower Convention videos. Next up, I've got some more cart crash footage to share with you guys, and we actually talked about some of these things, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. God bless.